Well, we did get what I'm going to say was some very expected news. This for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and specifically how well it's been doing in sales for the first couple of days. I mentioned before, I thought that this specific Pokemon release could end up being the best-selling Pokemon games of all time, and well, it's certainly off to a really strong start because some of the numbers you're going to see are eye-popping, but they are the fastest selling game release ever for Nintendo. So let's talk about this one, guys. If you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. Helps out a ton. And if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first of all, it is the day after Thanksgiving. So hopefully everyone out there who celebrated and had a chance to get together with family and ate food and all of this, hopefully had a great day. It was probably ate more than I needed to, but that's basically the conclusion I come to every single Thanksgiving each year. So, but it was a lot of fun. It was definitely a good time there. But let's start with the press release that Nintendo dropped. This says Pokemon Scarlet and Violet has sold over 10 million units. That's right, 10 million units worldwide within 3 days of its release. You know it's going to be a big number if Nintendo puts out a press release in just a few days. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet did not disappoint. We had some additional information here as well, specifically for Japan. But they say Nintendo announced that November 18th, 2022, Nintendo Switch software Pocket Monster Scarlet and Violet, the day it released, which was released simultaneously worldwide on the same day, has sold over 10 million units worldwide, of which 4.05 million units have sold domestically, that being in Japan. We do have some of the hard numbers for the physical releases out of Famitsu, so we can kind of compare that and even get a bit of a digital split. Even though Famitsu is more of an estimate, we at least get an idea as to what they're working with there when it comes to the overall ratio of physical versus digital, which we can see here. This cataloged over on installbaseforum.com. I will link to this and that press release down below if you want to look through it a bit more yourself. But because we of course have the 4.05 million number from Nintendo that is posted above this, but the Famitsu sales for the week November 14th to the 20th, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, yeah, look at that at the top, 2,537,292. That is not a common number. You generally don't see a 7-figure number in the Famitsu sales. Incredibly rare, but hey, Pokemon, it's a big-time release, specifically when a new generation launches. Sword and Shield was a 7-digit number and also pushed many Switch systems. We'll talk about that actually a little bit too. We do see Splatoon 3 here at 36,958, so pretty big disparity between the first and second spot. God of War Ragnarok, 9,901. Rights and Wrongs Forgotten, that's on the PS4, interestingly enough, 9,000 copies. Tactics Ogre Reborn on the Switch. Minecraft, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, because why not? Card Fight, Sympathy Kiss, and then Sonic Frontiers actually on the Switch to wrap up the top 10. Moving over to the hardware, the Switch at the top, 170,693. It's about 10,000 units or so behind Sword and Shield when that released. Of course, that being the last big new generation Pokemon game that dropped, that even on the Switch. So I'm still looking at this as being pretty strong overall for Switch sales, clearly being into its, well, we're going to be going into its 7th year in 2023 after March hits. So yeah, selling 170,000 systems at retail in Japan, pretty good at any time during the generation, let alone towards the end of it. Then we have the PS5, 31,858. The PS4 is odd because all of a sudden 5,803 sell. Like, that is a very weird jump there. And then the Xbox Series, 1,527, and the 3DS just continues to roll along with, I assume, systems that are just in the back warehouse somewhere. I do believe the Switch systems in Japan are probably supply constraint at this point, because I was expecting a little more out of Switch system sales to go alongside of the biggest launch ever in Nintendo's history when it comes to software. So hearing that information, I was expecting maybe 200,000. I think originally I said 180,000 to at least match Sword and Shield, taking into account that there are a lot of Switch systems out now compared to 2018, but nonetheless, I think 170,000 or so, and then taking into account that they're probably just sold out of Switches all across Japan. This is pretty solid stuff. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet coming in at that number at 2.537, just shy of Pokemon Black and White physically, 2.6 million. But remember, Black and White didn't have like the digital release that we're seeing here with Scarlet and Violet. You had to go out to retail to buy it. And in this case, if you had to do that here, it would have been most likely above 4 million either way. And all this information is telling us what we already know. Pokemon sells. And I saw some people online trying to figure out how did this happen? Like, all these issues with the game. The number one reason this sells is simply because it's Pokemon, along with the idea of this being the first open world experience, true open world experience for a mainline Pokemon game. I know Sword and Shield were looked at as being frustrating releases. There was an N64 tree in there, you know, those kind of things. There's all the stuff about national decks, and that goes on to sell 25 million copies. It's second to Pokemon Blue, Red, and Yellow. Yeah, that's, again, I'm looking at Scarlet and Violet compared to Sword and Shield as ending up probably above Red, Blue, and Yellow. And I've been playing more and more of Scarlet and Violet as I've gone along. Mostly I jump into the game from time to time and I'll do a gym and maybe a base, or I'll do one of the Titans and then a gym. And I am rolling through the game pretty well at this point. And I'll say something, I guess, positive and then something negative necessarily about the game very quickly. Positive side, I feel like I have a lot of variety in the Pokemon that I'm capturing right now, and more so than any other generation or even just Pokemon game in general that I've played. Like, I'm coming across all different types, and with some of the newer Pokemon that they have here, there are some interesting combinations of types with like steel and fire and ice and flying and ghost, and I feel like I have a lot of options even just a few hours into the game when I was starting out, which is great, and it makes the game very interesting when it comes to the strategy aspect of it. Something negative, though, that I noticed kind of comes to the gyms, because that's the part of the game that I was most interested in, and I think many people would be most interested in, because it's what we know with these Pokemon games where you would go to the different gyms, you get the badges, and then you become the big Pokemon master. I noticed, though, you don't really ever see the inside of any gyms. You go to like this building that looks the same in every single town. You get some sort of task to do outside of the gym, hide and seek, or just round up different plants, something like that. Then when you complete it, you fight the gym leader, and that's kind of it. I sort of missed the idea of having these gyms that were built out with different themes and maybe puzzles that are integrated in to go along with that type gym. But unfortunately here, it kind of looks like they strayed away from creating interiors of different buildings in general, which to me, it comes back to the idea of this Game Freak Pokemon Company cycle that most people look at as being set in stone. They could have delayed this, I'm sure. Like, it could have happened. It still would have sold well, but they didn't really have to. They were technically right about that. They released it, and here we are now with them selling 10 million copies in 3 days, which has people looking at this in both a positive light and a negative light. And it's kind of like, are you optimistic about this, or are you pessimistic about this? I'll give you the optimistic take. All right. So many copies of this have sold that clearly there will be plans for downloadable content, which to me means you want to make sure the games are in the best possible state to get that second push of sales. When downloadable content comes out for any game, people will go back to it to experience the new content, and in some cases, they'll buy the other version of the game. Maybe they have Violet and then they'll buy Scarlet. Great. Or maybe they will convince their friend to get it so that they can play multiplayer with this new downloadable content, and it's tough at times to recommend these Pokemon games with the technical issues that exist. Also, I think the idea of having a long tail for sales would certainly rely on them working to clean up the game with the bugs, the glitches, and the overall poor technical issues and visuals and all these different things. Basically, they've now collected a lot of money, so here's hoping they can actually get the game to a state that would be a more reasonable release, even though the game's already out and they've sold 10 million copies. Okay, the pessimistic way that people would be looking at this is that the sales were so strong and they didn't actually have to fix the game up before release, that why would they do that now? They realize that the Pokemon name itself is strong enough to sell out of the gate. It'll just keep selling. There's no need to dedicate resources to things like fixing up the frame rate or the aliasing or clipping through the walls with the camera. Basically, parts of the game that don't break the overall experience for the vast majority or mainstream audience. See, a lot of us who are plugged in see the frame rate and we go, oh, that doesn't feel great. Whereas, I mean, someone who maybe is just really into Pokemon, or they buy it for their kids or anything like that, they'll look past that or they won't even notice it. And overall, my take on this, looking at how ridiculous this sales situation is with 10 million copies selling in 3 days, absolutely absurd stuff. I mean, even if you think about how Splatoon Mania was taking over Splatoon 3, that was 3.45 million copies. The Pokemon outsold it in 600,000 copies overall. And I mean, as off the Splatoon, that's still pretty impressive. It took Pokemon to beat it out in Japan. But my take is Game Freak will most likely patch this, even though I know they don't have a history of necessarily patching performance issues and stuff in prior releases. I think it's so egregious and it's so vocalized right now to where reviews, I mean, absolutely crush this game. We see Digital Foundry's video. They call it a technical failure, and many reviews still coming in. I kind of think this is going to be close to Sonic Frontiers in terms of review scores when it's all said and done on Metacritic. And I mean, rightfully so when you look at the technical side of things. And that's the part that's a shame, because if this came out and it was at least, I'll say, passable to average when it comes to the technicals of the game, I think the conversation around this would be much better, and I feel like this would be a big celebration for the Pokemon franchise, really. We'd be thinking more about what's to come for Pokemon with this new format and this open world and how they can build it out to be even more interesting than it is now with some of the aspects and the storylines they have, rather than, wow, the frame rate's bad, people are falling through the floors, and people's eyes are bulging out of their head. However, I will say, if this game is not patched to an acceptable condition, I think going forward, when they show us trailers for these Pokemon games, and there's something weird in the trailer, whether it's a Pokemon like a Pidgey flapping at half speed or some very questionable texture somewhere, or even frame rates, I don't think we can really give them the benefit of the doubt that it will be fixed by launch, just because of how we've seen Scarlet and Violet. So yeah, there's going to be some, I'll say, some challenges for the overall image of Game Freak and Pokemon as we go to the next release. But I mean, at this point, it's already a resounding success out of the gate for launch. And think about this. The holiday season is just now about to get started. And this is certainly going to be one of the biggest sellers when it comes to gift giving and buying a Switch. You're going to get Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and probably a Pokemon game. So I would not be surprised if we find out that in this quarter alone, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sell nearly 20 million copies. And at that point, rolling through all of next year, most likely with a crash course for downloadable content of some kind, it's going to become the best-selling Pokemon game of all time. And that would eclipse Blue, Red, and Yellow, nearing about 32 million copies sold. But let me know what you guys think about this situation, the sales numbers that get out there. 10 million copies in 3 days. Did that shock you? Because it seemed like it surprised most people online. Not necessarily that Pokemon is selling well. We kind of expected it, but 10 million in 3 days. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.